All right, welcome everybody. I'm John Haig. I am the co-director of the Mossavar Rahmani Center for Business and Government. I think this is terrific that you all were able to get here. I think we have fantastic speakers, and it's possible that free food has a little bit to do with you showing up, but more importantly, I think it's the speakers. So I just want to introduce really quickly Soroush Saghafian, and a little bit of background. He does a lot of research, developing operations research, management science, operation management techniques, to really drive them towards public benefits. He is the founder and director of something here at Harvard called the Public Impact Analytics Sciences Lab, PIAS Lab. He kind of created it and built it from scratch, focuses on machine learning and big data analytics tools. And he does a lot of work in the healthcare field. He collaborates with hospitals. He has many, many affiliations across Harvard. He is a core faculty member for the Harvard Center for Health Decision Science. He's an affiliate for the Harvard PhD program in health policy. He is a member at the Harvard Data Science Initiative at the Belfer Center. He's obviously, from my view, most importantly, a major contributor to the center as a faculty affiliate of the center, the Mossavar Rahmani Center for Business and Government. And I could go on and on. I think he's affiliated with the Ariadne Lab at Harvard and Mass General Brigham Hospitals. So just a fantastic set of affiliations and backgrounds and research agenda. The other person sitting here is Richard Zeckhauser. I do have to personalize a little bit. Hopefully not, Richard won't mind. I am an MPP, Kennedy School MPP 1982. And Richard's class was the best class I've ever taken in my life. I would strongly encourage you to take his analytic methods course if you're a student. And he was, I've enjoyed working with him for many, many years. He came to Harvard when he was 17 years old to get his undergraduate degree, and he never left. He got his PhD from the economics department and was immediately hired as a faculty member and got tenure very quickly. He does a lot of work in decision theory and behavioral economics. And I'll kind of leave it at that. I guess the one thing I'd say, he's got 330 articles he's published, 14 books he's published. He's edited a number. He's created a lot of new terminology, if you will, in this whole area of decision theory and behavioral economics. And a small aside, uh, he has won many national championships in contract bridge. So if you're a bridge player, you might want to have a conversation about that. With that, I'll turn it over to Richard and to Soroush. We will have a drawing for Soroush's book. So if you haven't put your name in the fishbowl back there, uh, as we get close to the end, you may want to just write on a piece of paper and go drop it in, and you'll get one of the potentially free books. So with that, it's all yours, guys.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Soroush a bit more, and then he's going to give a short presentation of the book, and then my only job is to ask questions. He's the guy who has to provide all the answers. So first, Soroush, I want to congratulate you on this remarkable book. To use the language of your volume, it represents a constrained optimum on the importance of the subject material, the rigor of its argument, and the clarity of its presentation. So I recommend it to all of you, and it's actually well priced for a book um, that is of this length and of this level of rigor, and is published by University Press. So why don't you start off with a brief discussion why, for whom you wrote this book, and what you think it accomplishes. And why don't you step to the podium to give us your answers?
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me start with um thanking and welcoming everybody to the session today. I know we have quite a few individuals here. Some people even came from UK, and I'm grateful also to people who joined us through the Zoom. I know a lot of people have joined us there as well. I would like to also thank a few individuals who really supported me through writing this book. My wife who's here, my daughter who's not here, my parents and friends. They supported me through this long, very long journey, actually, to finish this book. My PhD students and postdoc fellows, again, some of them are here. They helped me reshape my minds. Senior fellows and other members of my lab, the Public Impact Analytics Science Lab, I'm thankful to them, as well as various colleagues and collaborators from different organizations and from both industry and academia that over the years, those collaborations have shaped what I think and what I do. I also want to thank my students who have taken my course during last several years. The ones that are taking now, some of them are here, so thank you for joining us today. Um, and special thanks to my friend and mentor Richard Zeckhauser. So I have a few paragraphs from the books that I want to just briefly mention here. Richard earlier books, Deep Thoughts and Generous Mentorship during my years at Harvard have been instrumental in shaping several aspects of this book. In numbers, the deeply insightful conversation that Richard have had with you, you have generously helped me overcome multiple barriers, and you have helped me to refine my thoughts and become a much stronger thinker. So thank you, Richard. And your profound encouragement and unmatched influence over the years helped me actually to write this book. It's been instrumental in shaping various aspects of my career and life, and some of them extend well beyond writing this book. So thank you for your mentorship and support. A little bit background about my lab quickly and my work in general. So as both John and Richard mentioned, I'm the founder and director of the Public Impact Analytics Science Lab at Harvard. So we do lots of work on trying to, understand analytics and trying to develop analytical tools and try to apply them to improve various aspects of society. My teaching has been focused on machine learning and big data analytic tools for solving societal problems. And my research and collaborations have been also on trying to, again, use analytics and related methods that can have public impact. So I have a short video as an example of some of the things that I do in my lab. If we can play that, that would be great. This is a project that we have right now with Amazon, as well as with Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and with Harvard Data Science Initiative. So just to give you a little bit of sense of what I do in my lab. After many years of knowing what cancer is, we still are unable to handle cancer and to provide effective treatments. One of the hopes of this project is to find ways of treating each patient individually and find the very best thing for that individual patient. My name is Soroush Saghafian. I'm an associate professor here at Harvard Kennedy School. Unfortunately, what the medical literature and the medical practice has been all about is to provide guidelines for treating an average patient. Truth is that there is no average patient. Each patient is different. Now, the types of AI technologies that I work in my lab, they can allow us to understand patients at the genomic level. We are seeing that, patient A and patient B are different. Then AI system is trained on those differences and can understand those differences that a physician might not be able to understand immediately. One of the areas we are working on is on cancer and specifically on melanoma. We are collaborating now with Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. We are using their data on genome sequencing, lots of clinical notes, other types of information that we are training the AI tools on those types of data, and the output would be a system that would analyze these types of data and try to ask AI to provide solutions at that individual level. It's not enough to have an AI system that can provide effective recommendations. Humans are in the front seat of delivering care, and they have to be convinced. Otherwise, the AI system is just another system that is there. And so one of the things that we are working on is how do you have the AI tools that not just provide recommendations, but provide convincing recommendations and can have conversation with the physician, can convince them, and can also correct themselves. The partnership with AWS is providing us with an opportunity to essentially improve the impact of what we want to do. Developing an LLM and fine-tuning it and training it to be able to provide detailed recommendations for physicians at that level, it requires a large amount of computational power that we don't have in our lab. But with the AWS partnership and with their funding, we are enabling us to essentially do this and make it happen. Thank you. So just as an example of what we do in my lab, we can go back to my slides. Let me start by saying why this book and why now. So when you think about how to solve complex problems in what I call the age of algorithms, you will realize that there are lots of complexities. So when you think about healthcare inefficiencies, like we are spending about 18% of the GDP now in healthcare, when you look at the outcomes of the healthcare that we have in the US, we don't have comparable outcomes to many other countries. When you think about climate change and pandemic issues, when you think about crime inequality or supply chain disruptions that are uh, recurrent. When you think about AI transformative risk and opportunities that are out there, these are all issues that when we think about them, we realize that we are living in an era of complexity. Now, what analytics allow you to do is to essentially bring a clarity to this complexity. Solving these problems requires essentially insights, not just data and models. Analytic science again provides a framework that allows you to think about complexity and bring clarity to those issues. So if I want to summarize the book in a nutshell, I'm going to just use the editorial sort of reviews and editorial summaries. One editorial review says it's an intriguing tour of the main ideas in analytics and how they have impacted the world around us. Another editorial review says the book presents how combining big picture ideas in artificial intelligence, in machine learning, in operations research, optimization, statistics, economics, and among others, has made the world a better place. And of course, I cannot not share the AI review of the book with you. The AI summary of the review of the book says it's a century of ideas and analytics science united by a common good, which is improving decision making for social good. So that's what the book is about, essentially. But the book also provides you with a lot of historical context. So, for instance, you learn that a lot of ideas that we have today in the AI tools that are out there, they, for instance, go back to the birth of AI in this event at Dartmouth College in 1956, where a bunch of really smart people like John McCarty, Marvin Minsky, Claude Shannon, they got together and they proposed essentially ideas that ended up in what we have today, what we know today as AI. You also learn that the birth of queuing theory, which resulted in what we have today as the largest queue called internet, goes back to, for instance, the work of Erlang, who was at the time was a young engineer, and he was tasked with the real challenge of improving this telephone switching system. So he has started doing that, and the same ideas, developed and later resulted in again what we call internet today. You also realize things like Google Map that you might use every day. The main ideas there and the main algorithm that is used there called A star, for instance, goes back to 60s, where scientists were trying to teach this robot called Shaky to go from point A to point B. So you learn a lot of historical context about these ideas in analytics science as well. You also learn about lots of different applications. For instance, how the models that we have in climate change right now can predict what will happen in future. So this is one of them called HAT-CM3. And what you see here is showing essentially the changes in temperature in the next 50 years. So how can a model, predict those types of changes? You also learn that a lot of sort of insights that we have today for solving issues that economies face were, for instance, developed and were communicated to us by lots of different individuals, including Bill Phillips. Here is Bill Phillips working on a machine called Maniac. He developed this to showcase how different forces in economies interact with each other and how we can use those forces to essentially improve economies. You also learn about sort of ideas that we have today for solving things like segregation. Uh, and so this is what Tom Schelling, a person that Richard knows really well, a Nobel Prize winner, also started to work on, and he communicated ideas in solving segregation using those models. You also learn that a lot of experiences that you have in your daily life. Like, for instance, going to groceries and you see that there is a sign there that says 15 items or less. So these ideas were developed using queuing theory, and they are also used in emergency rooms. So when you go to emergency rooms, they may send you to a fast track, for instance. And interestingly enough, they are also used in improving various other historical events. This is, for instance, the largest queue that I know of was formed for people who wanted to say goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. And, queuing theorists were using those ideas to improve that historical event, essentially. So if I want to summarize, this accessible book essentially tries to show you how combining AI, data science, or optimization and economies has made the world a better place. It also uses ordinary language. So that was one of my goals, was just to use ordinary language to explain all the technical concepts and examples. So there are, I believe, only 2 equations throughout the whole book. Everything else is in plain language. So in summary, what this book offers to you is this. I think your chance of becoming an a successful entrepreneur, or somebody who can solve, or who will be remembered for solving one of the lingering societal problems, will be increased if you learn about the main ideas in analytic science and know how to use those ideas to solve problems. And if you're interested in learning those ideas in plain language, and if you're curious to know how you can use those ideas in analytic science to address whatever problem you're interested in, I think you will find the book useful. I'm going to also finish by just showing you what other people have thought about the book. These are other people who have reviewed the book. This is Ray Kurzweil, who is the Google chief futurist and the recipient of the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, and a person who has written a lot of interesting books on AI. This is from Dean of School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, David Parks, and he's also a very well-known computer scientist who have reviewed the book. And finally, this is Scott Page, who is a very well-known writer and very well-known thinker in this area. And so I encourage you to also read the book and send me your views of the book.
Okay, thank you, Soroush. That was terrific. First, I want to make a remark suggested by Soroush's comments, which may be of concern to all the people in this room, which is there's lots of worry that young people, the people overwhelmingly in this room, are going to be more or less unemployed because AI is going to just take over what we can do. And one of the things that Soroush stressed in his remarks and is stressed in this book, which is called Insight-Driven Problem Solving, is that it's insight-driven. And one of the things that you will discover, and we'll be discovering more, is it's not so much solving a problem. If you give AI a problem, which is like the traditional problems that I used to teach in my course, it will do a better job than you can, and it will do it 1,000,000 times faster. But the important thing is to know which problem to solve and to do that. So he mentioned his problem of, personalizing cancer treatment. I would just observe that as a reward to his insight, not to his problem-solving skills, which are impressive, but in reward to his insight, Soroush has won 3 major awards for starting this year and next year. One of them is from the Department of Defense to worry about cancer treatment. A second one is from Amazon, also worrying more about forms of cancer treatment. And the last one, which I think is the most impressive in terms of what it's doing and the insight needed, is in conjunction with a team in Hungary with a prize from the Hungarian Innovation Agency, basically on how to redesign our healthcare systems so that we accomplish more people. And as a person who's won this much in awards throughout my lifetime, I'll just mention that Soroush's awards are for $2.8 million from the Defense Department, $550,000 from Amazon, and $1.1 million from the Hungarian agency. So he's won in 1 year more than I've won, would win in 7 lifetimes, which is, slightly humiliating. But he doesn't play bridge as well. So I think it's about even. So Soroush, you've been exceedingly busy in recent years producing impressive levels of scholarship. And some of that scholarship is in traditional analytic subjects in which you were formally trained. So you write about queuing theory and Markov chains. They're both, terrific subjects. But we hired Soroush to come here and teach such stuff. And then along came large language models and artificial intelligence. And we said, we have to teach that because it's so critical for the problems that society confronts. So would you go and teach that course? And out of thin air, Soroush went and taught that course, which has been exceedingly popular and also accessible to people who have little in the way of analytic training and to some people who were computer scientists or mathematicians and the like. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience trained as an operations researcher and then thrown into, you don't take offense, this snake pit of large language models and artificial intelligence, and creating a course, creating a research agenda, creating a lab, creating a life?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So I think what I've observed over the years is that the traditional boundaries that we have between different branches of science have over time dissolved. And this is especially the case in analytic science. And so what used to be called operations research and optimization and those techniques naturally resulted in what we have now, AI, and what we call AI and machine learning. So a lot of algorithms that are out there, if you search their roots and think about their roots, they go back to ideas in optimization and operations research and things like that. So, for instance, you can think of how you can train transformers that are underlying these LLMs. The ideas go back to uh, issues in algorithms in optimization and things like that. And teaching these ideas and algorithms and other things in machine learning and AI over the years have taught me, have essentially reinforced this idea that what we have now are essentially different ideas in analytic science, that they are essentially interconnected, but different manifestations of uh, some branches of science, right? But they have all the same sort of scientific pursuit, and that's to use this insights that we get from these tools to impact society and to how to move the society forward. And I think like what Darwin has said is like the strongest of the species is not the one that is the most intelligent or the strongest, is the one that is most adaptive, right? And so I think I have been trying myself as a learner and as an educator to be as adaptive as possible. When new ideas come, you learn them and you try to communicate them to others. And I encourage my students and other people who are also in the room or in the Zoom to be the same, to be adaptive and to learn those ideas and try to again use them to improve the world.
So let me ask another question that I think is relevant to the people here. There's been considerable discussion about the advent of artificial intelligence and the de-skilling of the population. That basically, if the machine can do it for you, no reason for you to learn how to do it yourself. And that's sure to happen with regard to, say, balancing your checkbook. Um, but I'm talking now about more advanced things, for example, that could help us solve a variety of policy problems. Um, and let me give an example from my class. There are a number of my students here. Um, Up through last fall, ChatGPT could not solve the problems that I give them my problem set. And I was feeling pretty confident. And in 2025, ChatGPT can now solve almost all of the problems that used to be in my problem set. So we have to change some of the problems, and we have to come up with new types of problems that unite human intelligence and machine intelligence. So given these capabilities, do you think that students still need to learn about things like queuing theory or sequential decision theory? And if so, why?
Yeah, well, another great question. So I think the answer is yes, and the reason is because uh, we do not need just to focus on the problem solving aspect of things, but the education uh, makes it important is about understanding the problem and trying to make sure that we get the right insights for the problem. This is what AI tools actually lack. They are really good in terms of giving you the solution, but the main step of understanding the problem, questioning the sort of the assumptions that you have, those are the things that AI tools unfortunately lack. And I have written this in a few blogs as well, that the AI tools are really great tools for giving you the solution, but it's the human side that makes sure that the problem is correctly defined, that the questions and the assumptions that are made are really essential here. These disciplines of thinking analytically, which Richard has done a lot of work on, essentially they teach us to how to think about uncertainty, right, and how to deal with different trade-offs. And we mentioned in the book that a lot of times we spend the time to get the correct solution for the wrong problem. This is very common. I believe that getting a mediocre solution for the correct problem is much better than getting the best solution for the wrong problem, right? And this is where, again, like I think these ideas of thinking about uncertainty and making sure that the trade-offs are well sort of organized in the problem that we are trying to solve is important. So I think in a nutshell, I think we should focus more on the why of problem solving as opposed to how of the problem solving. And I agree with you that the AI tools now are great. If you give them a problem, they give you the solution very well. Alpha Geometry 2, which was developed by Google's DeepMind, was able to achieve gold medal in international math Olympiad. That's just fascinating. Those problems, when I was in high school, I used to work on those problems and would frustrate me. Now you have an AI tool that can solve them. But it's different again to for solving societal problems. Essentially, you need to make sure that the assumptions are correctly there, that you can question whether you are solving the right problem or not, and that this is the human side that allows you to move the insights that you get from the solutions to actual impact, right? So those links are not there in AI tools, at least for the time being, and I cannot predict whether they're going to be there in 20 years or something like that, but at least at the moment we do need to make sure that these steps are correctly taken.
So I might mention that even in the very formal area of mathematics, coming up with the right problem is frequently as important as coming up with a solution. There's a great mathematician named Hilbert who created a series of problems uh, many, many years ago. Some of these problems still remain unsolved, and you can make your career by solving one of Hilbert's problems. So that's what he was great at. He was good at making up profound problems. This isn't one of his, but there's the four-color map theorem, which seems obvious, and even Cora, your 6-year-old daughter, could tell you it's true that you only need 4 colors to color a map. But it took us, hundreds of years to figure out how to do that. So it's a profound problem, hard solution. Um, you made, I think, a convincing argument both in your book and in your remarks um, that we should continue to learn these skills that just help us to give us insights. But we know that humans are lazy. So the people who are in this room, my students who are in this room, are the eager beavers. They wanted to come out and learn more. But there are hundreds of other people whom we had not limited attendance could have shown up,
Yeah.
but my guess is that many of them wouldn't. So this is asking you as a psychologist, not as an operations researcher, do you think that people will sort of be lazy and just sort of say, oh, I'll turn my life over to machines or large portions of my life to machines?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately not don't have any experience in psychology, but if you don't mind, I want to change your question a little bit from laziness to this natural desire to be efficient. And so all of us are naturally, we want to be efficient. So like as a faculty member, Richard, you write a lot of letters for your students, for other people, and you would like to be more efficient, given that your time is really valuable. And so I think this AI tools are amazing in making us a lot more efficient in different tasks that we need to do during the day. But I do not think that, again, that translates for educators to think that they don't need to teach the ideas of thinking and analytical thinking again to their students. And I believe that it's still very, very important for people to understand what the machine is doing, because then you can question the outputs that you get from the machine. If you don't understand what it is doing, then it makes it hard to rely on it as a reliable tool. And I think when the students are essentially encouraged to see AI as an intellectual partner, rather than some uh, rather than a tool that would allow them to be lazy, or, as I said, try to help them be more efficient in a positive sort of view of what you said, I think they began to ask questions, and then again, like, they can rely on the outputs that they get more. So I want the students and other people to see AI more as an intellectual partner. So think of that as somebody, a friend that you have that is really intellectual. Yes, it can help you to be more efficient. It can do a lot for you. But again, it's important for you to be able to ask the right questions, question the outputs that you get from AI tools. And I've observed this in medicine a lot, because some of the recommendations, physicians sometimes they become lazy, as Richard mentioned, unfortunately, and they get like the recommendation and patients too, they get recommendation from these AI tools. And unfortunately, a lot of cases, the recommendations are so bad that they would, unfortunately kill the patient in some severe situations.
So let me turn to one of the most creative people who ever lived, Albert Einstein. You open your book with this quote from Albert Einstein. Quote, "If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution." So I'm just wondering, you've spent dozens of hours thinking about a problem, most often a real world problem that can ultimately lead to an analytic answer. Do you think that this 11-to-1 ratio of defining and thinking, figuring out what problem you want to solve, as opposed to finding the solution, still applies now that we're 75 years beyond Einstein's death, and in this world where we have machines that are really super at solving problems?
Yeah, I think we now need to spend even more than that 11-to-1 ratio to think about the problems. And as I mentioned, this is because a lot of times what I've observed, and other people have observed too, is that we spend the time to get the best answer for the wrong problem, rather than trying to find a solution for the correct problem. And coming up with the correct problem and to solve is really challenging. I always encourage the students taking my machine learning and big data class to start by just thinking about their data. For instance, if they have the data, or just try to think about the problem. A lot of times what I observe is that people try to say, okay, now I have this problem, what's the most sophisticated algorithm or approach that I can use to solve this problem? That's, to me, is wrong. You need to understand your data, visualize it, play with the data. And if you don't have data, same things, if you're using a different analytical method to solve your problem. And in the book, I have several examples of why this is important. So one of the examples is, for instance, what happened in SRC, Statistical Research Council, back days ago, when this was close to Columbia University. They hired a bunch of very smart people trying to solve some of the war issues. And one of the smartest people was Abraham Wald. There were a lot of actually smart people there. Frederick Mosteller, who started the stat department here, somebody that Richard, again, you knew well. Milton Friedman, the Nobel winner in econ, was there. Lots of smart people, but the smartest person was Abraham Wald. And so here's the example that I have in the book. The Air Force asked them to come up with recommendations for best ways of armoring the aircraft so the aircrafts are not attacked as much. So they, get together. Everybody had an approach. They try to collect some data about, okay, so where are the bullets, focused more, right? So they collected data about the bullets per square foot on the aircraft, and so they realized that, well, the wings and the fuel system are more attacked than the engines, right? So everybody suggested that, hey, we should armor the wings, and we should, or the fuel system and things like that. The least affected area were the engines, and Abraham Wald says that's the area that we should start armoring. And so everybody was like, why is that so? And so he followed one of the analytical thinking maxims that, Richard, you have also emphasized over the years, which is to go to the maximum, to the extreme cases. That helps a lot. And his idea was that, okay, so let's think about if the engines, when the engines are hit, the probability of coming back is zero. Let's go to that extreme case. So then the data that we have is already only about the aircrafts that came back, right? So we have no data about aircrafts that did not came back, and actually they did not come back because the engine was hit, right? So I believe that, again, like, thinking about the problem, and those are the type of things that AI tools actually can't, at least at the moment, can't help.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question about what studies you chose to emphasize in your books. For example, you mentioned Wald's study of, you know, uh, plane survival, but you've worked overwhelmingly in the medical field, usually in conjunction with eminent medical institutions. So you mentioned the Dana-Farber Center, but you've also worked for a long time with the Mayo Clinic, now working with Massachusetts General Hospital, and they've dealt with an amazing number of studies, making emergency rooms more efficient, medical imaging, diagnosing bipolar disorder, improving outcomes from kidney transplantation. I could take up our remaining 23 minutes discussing them. But it's surprising to me that although you mention most of these studies, they get relatively little attention in your book. You're off wandering with Abraham Wald and other people. So why did you make this choice to talk so much about studies in other realms and not more about the realm in which you've devoted most of your attention?
Yeah, so I think the main reason is because I didn't want the book to be about my work. Honestly, I wanted the book to showcase sort of like the main ideas in analytics science. I discuss some of my work throughout the book as well, and how they've had impact, and what ideas have had impact, and why, and also when I failed. I talk about those failures as well in the book. But I think, again, I didn't want the book to be about my work. I think, there's lots of different areas where these ideas in analytic science have had impact. In my course, we cover a lot of different cases, for instance, for improving the crime rates, for, using ideas in reinforcement learning, for instance, to understand how we should, what policies in terms of reducing the climate change and things like that we should follow. Or I teach my students algorithms that can enable us understand or predict, essentially, before a case goes to the Supreme Court, what will happen for the case. And I think what I try to do in the book is try to put all of this together and discuss, like, the main ideas and the big picture ideas that enable all of these different tools. So I think that's sort of the main reason for that.
So I might remark that some of my favorite material in your book was in your introduction in chapter 1, which is titled The Big Picture of Analytic Science. And these chapters, it seemed to me, were long on Soroush wisdom and less devoted to Soroush's technical expertise. They seem to reflect the insights of a mature scholar. And I don't want to be belittling, but not something you could have written 10 years ago. So can you give me some thoughts on how your thinking has evolved in these areas, how you think about these materials, how long it took you to write them? Um,
Yeah, absolutely. So first, Richard, I want to mention that I've learned a lot from you. and that's what has enabled me to write more about wisdom and things like that. As Richard Taylor is one of the Nobel Prize winners. He correctly said that spending an hour with you is like injecting a huge amount of wisdom to your brain. And I think that's correct. So first of all, I've spent a lot of time with you, as you know, and I've learned a lot from you. But in the previous years, what I've also done is that I've gone out of the analytic science and I've gone to philosophers, and I've tried to study a little bit of philosophy of science and philosophy in general, and learn about how they have thought about some of this problem. So in the book, for instance, I discussed that this idea of analytic thinking originated from most likely from Rene Descartes, for instance, that taught us the doctrine of reductionism, which is underlying and the backbone of essentially analytic thinking. Or I discussed the work of David Hume. I start the AI and machine learning chapter with a quote from David Hume, which essentially says, look, the ways to solve the problems that we don't have experience with is to learn from the problems that we have experience with. So this is the empiricism ideas of David Hume, which are generalized now to machine learning and AI algorithms. And we use a different language. We say, okay, we train the algorithm over this data so that it can do work well on the test data sets, right? But if you think about those ideas, you are using experiences that you've had to do things that you haven't had experience with. Or I've also noticed that even Einstein, for instance, has a letter that says he owes the ideas of relativism, relativity theory to the work of David Hume. He said, like, if David Hume hasn't written about some of those things, he would probably not worked on relativity. So I think a lot of these ideas, and what I do in the book is this idea of scaffolding, where a scientist comes and stands in the shoulder of others and tries to now improve the ideas. And that's how we have right now. We have Google Assistant, we have Alexa that my daughter talks to all the time and asks questions from Alexa. But if you think about like all the ideas, how is it that that Alexa, for instance, learns to answer questions and things like that? Goes back to this ideas that we owe to several, I think, big thinkers.
So this is an aside, but I do marvel at your ability to collapse time. So I just want to mention two awards that Soroush has won. If I had to mention them all once again, we'd use up the rest of the hour. But in 2021, as he was a young scholar, he won the Inform's Young Scholar Award, the most outstanding young scholar in the field, things like that. And that was very impressive. And then for 2020, the most distinguished award in operations research is the Franz Edelman Award. And that's an award that you give to people who are, 65 years old, who are leading a large research team or whatever else it is. And well, there is a little gray hair here, but basically in 2025, Soroush and a tiny team competing against major corporations and the like was a semifinalist for the Franz Edelman Award. And it's a little bit like the US Open. If you're a semifinalist this year, 5 years from now, you're going to win. You don't have to say anything, but I'm just making that as an aside. But I'm wondering, if you mentioned a couple of things in your opening remarks. Can you talk about a couple of brief illustrations from your work and then build on that to talk about beneficial policies in areas such as climate change and crime reduction? Indeed, focus on those, which is not where you've worked, but where having your reservoir of understanding and wisdom, you can think of what people might do. So if a young student walked into you and said, Professor Saghafian, I'm interested in crime reduction. This stuff doesn't work for crime reduction. I mean, criminals are little kids or teenagers and young adults running around with guns. So tell us how this might work.
Yeah, so again, like what I see is that there is a common ground for all of these different approaches in analytic science. So, for instance, in addressing crime, what I teach in my class is that we have this machine learning algorithms that we can now use, and some of the police departments from Santa Cruz, for instance, is using it to predict what areas in the city, the risk of crime is at the highest rate, and then you can do that per second. And what it allows you to do is that you can use your police officers way more efficiently, right? So imagine that if you have a really good prediction of where the risk of crime at the city at each instant of time is the highest, you can move your, police officers, and you can use them much more, efficiently. In healthcare, which is my area of work mainly, I use them for different things. We can predict what will happen to the patient that comes to the hospital, for instance, and says, "Oh, I have chest pain," right? You predict, like, is it related to heart disease, or is it something else? And if you have a good algorithm that can do that, you can do a lot, right? So I think, again, there is a common ground underlying all of these tools and thinking in analytic science that can be applied to different areas. And I mentioned in climate change, for instance, when I teach reinforcement learning in my course, I mentioned that you can use that to decide about what are the best ways of reducing carbon emission, for instance, because same ideas that hold with some understanding of the problem, some expertise in that a specific area, will allow you to generate insights. And what is important then is to generate insights that are actionable, right? And if you can generate actionable insights using these tools, you can do a lot. You can help the society a lot.
So I'm going to end on a subject that is not central to your book, but I'm sure it's on the minds of all the individuals who are sitting in this room. There's been a great deal of discussion of the grave dangers of AI, and particularly generative AI. Some scholars and observers and critics raise the specter of AI leading to the collapse of civilization, perhaps even the extermination of the human race. And at the other end, there are those techno-optimists who forecast great prosperity, the cure of devastating diseases, even advances in culture. You've been working in this field for a number of years. You've taught large numbers of current and future policymakers. I'm sure many of them have raised this issue with you. Um, you've developed extraordinary new methods for addressing in particular healthcare challenges. As far as I know, none of them have led to significant negative outcomes. But cast your eyes forward a decade, and things may be different. So, would you just provide us with your wisdom on this subject?
Yeah, I don't know if I have wisdom, but I can share what I think is that I remember when ChatGPT was about to be publicly introduced. This is a few years ago. I was on TV interviewing with a person who was interested to know what are the sort of dark sides of using ChatGPT. And at the time, we had several examples. It was clear that scammers can use that to get your credit card numbers, and lots of different aspects of using ChatGPT and other publicly available tools in a negative way as opposed to a positive way. I believe with any technology, obviously there's the positive side and there's the negative side. And I think I'm on the optimistic camp where I think, like, the benefits are much larger than the dangers. And what we can do is that we can create sort of safety nets around them. And this is when I think about how cars, we have cars on the streets right now, but if you go read about them, when the cars were actually about to be uh, manufactured, lots of people said, oh, if we are going to manufacture this and we're going to put them on the streets, and so they're going to run over our kids and they're going to kill pedestrians and things like that, or they're going to, the person who's driving this is going to be killed. And so what happened over time was that, yes, over time we figure out, we develop better brakes, we developed better, we have now belts, right? We have better brakes, as I said. We have safety rules, right? Or we changed how the speed limits, all other things that we have right now that have enabled us to make use of cars and airplanes as well safe while taking advantage of their benefits. And this is what I believe we are gonna, and at least hope that we are gonna be able to do, is to have this sort of safety belts for using AI tools that we can take advantage of them in a safe way. It requires time, it requires research to know what is the exact break for the AI, what is the exact safety belt for using AI. But we are going to be there. We are going to figure it out pretty soon, and then we are going to have tools that have huge amount of benefit. Still, the negative side is not going to be zero. It's never going to be zero. You still have people who use cars for killing other people's, right? Same is going to be with AI. But again, when you think about the percentage benefit versus the percentage sort of disadvantage, I think we are going to get there, and we're going to have safe tools that we can enjoy.
So I'm going to refer to you not as a techno-pessimist, nor as a techno-optimist, but a techno-pragmatist. And that's the way we would like to do things. And a pragmatic thing, how are we giving out the books? We'll do that at the very end. Okay, we have 10 minutes, which we reserve for questions from the audience. Yes? Stand up and talk loudly.
Just hold for a second because we're online, so we want everybody to be able to hear the question.
My question is, insights are driven by when we experiment, we fail, and we learn also. So you're saying focusing on the right problem. So what are your examples of when you focus on the wrong problem and when you focus on the right? Like, doesn't it come by trial and error? And what's there?
Yeah, so it comes with trial and error, but you learn from doing this over time. So let me give you an example. When I was young, I was tasked with improving. I was working on the assembly lines of the cars, and I was tasked with improving the speed at which the cars are assembled, right? And so one of the issues we were, collecting time data about, like how much time the labor and the machines are spending on different aspects of the assembling car. And one of the things that was delaying the process was installing the bumpers, interestingly. So I realized that there is like a specific screw that these laborers that are, putting the bumpers in, they had to actually manually do the screw and, take something out and then put it this. So in terms of being really efficient, that was really not efficient. There were a lot of problems. There are a lot of people trying to solve that, right? And what they did, they went to the engineers and they went to the, top people in the company, and they said, oh, we can change the design of this, we can do this, we can do this. But the issue was that they didn't know what the issue exactly was. So they came up with wrong things that made at the end, they changed the design of the car and make it even slower to assemble. What I did was that I was also lucky. I went to talk to the people on the line, the laborers that are actually there. I realized that they are the ones who know, right? And they showed me the actual issue that they were dealing with. And so understanding that that was the problem. The problem was not the design of the car. The problem was this specific, thing that they were having to deal with. We used the same car, same design, and we improved the assembly by 3 minutes, which is if you multiply by how many cars are manufactured per year in a large company, that results in a lot of improvements.
We have other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Bahman. I'm from Cardiff University in Wales. So Soroush mentioned I came from UK. My question is a little bit about challenges. So I work with hospitals in the UK, but at the same time I work with Ministry of Health of countries in Africa, and I see similar challenges. And the challenges are hospitals in the UK are still crowded. You go to EDs, people literally they're dying. So, you see them in news. In terms of like, let's say Africa supply chain problems, I do projects in family planning and vaccine. Unfortunately, we have estimated of 1.5 million children dying because they don't get vaccines, life-saving vaccines, and so on. So you may ask, well, there are a lot of issues, but where is analytics? Well, the problem with analytics is I visit hospitals and they still use Excel spreadsheets and their brain to do scheduling, and we know that we have thousands of research on emergency department scheduling algorithm. And when it comes to vaccines, for instance, they use moving average and min max inventory policy, while we have so many advanced analytics. So, there are questions that, they're getting back to me, and I'm asking myself, what is the missing puzzle? Why we still don't have these issues?
Yeah, so I think if I understand your question is in terms of implementation of these tools, and I definitely agree with you that so some parts we are way behind, some parts we are ahead. Um, the question of implementation, of course, is the role of people like you to go there and say, like, we have this better ways of doing this, and if you do it in this way, look, the impact of, like you mentioned, for instance, the scheduling in ERs. You can say, well, if you do this, the average length of stay of patients are going to reduce by 10%, versus you are doing this, you're using moving average, which is not effective here. So that's why you cannot reduce the length of stay of the patients, or you cannot use your physicians in an effective way. I can give you one example from my own work where, we were trying to help, physicians to be more efficient in the same area. And, again, like if these things are not implemented at the end of the day, they don't have solution. And you have to think about what is actionable for that specific situation, right? You can't just go to them and say, oh, I have this Python package. Why don't you run this Python package on 4 parallel computers and do X and Y and Z? And they'll say, what is a parallel computer, right? So for that, they don't have the tools or things like that. So for problem solving, as I mentioned, it's important to come up with actionable insights. And what is actionable and what's not actionable completely depends on the context, completely depends on the problem environment that you are solving, right? And these are all parts of problem solving, right? What Richard was saying, that we need to spend a lot of time on understanding the problem. This is because when you want to generate actionable insights, a lot of this is also understanding the environment, tools, and things that are available there.
Yes, sir.
Professor Jack Hawes's toolkit of thinking about extreme case of any policy, so which you also referred to. So I would like to ask you why AGI becoming a reality without any guardrails, and why that should not be a problem which should confront policymakers instead of being eternal optimist about things going wrong as they are going. I mean, without any regulation in place.
Yeah, I think with AGI specifically, I think what we really need are those safety belts, and it's very hard. I know quite a few groups that are working on sort of safety nets and trying to come up with ways that we can control AGI. I believe it's hard to come up with understand those things, but we need time, right? We didn't develop, using belts in cars were not a thing for many years, right? People were driving cars without using safety belts, right? Same with AGI. I think we need to understand what sort of things we should do to make them safe in terms of policies and regulations in using them. And it's also a lot domain based, right? So you have domains like healthcare where things are extremely sensitive, and you have other domains of documentation and making documents, even in healthcare, right? You can use that for making to fill out a form, for instance, for authorization for insurance, for other things, or you can use it to come up with cancer treatment to save people. So these are a lot also sort of domain based, and so but my hope and my prediction is that we are going to get there with some research, some work, and some time.
So the question was asked about areas where we didn't think about, or we didn't experiment, or we didn't think about what could go wrong. And I think a great example, at least for recent era, is the COVID pandemic. And in the United States, we basically closed all the schools. It turns out that there was little transmission from children to adults. And it also turned out that we lost a year to 2 years of schooling for kids across the United States, particularly for the less advantaged people. And that was not part of the general discussion. There weren't editorials in the New York Times saying, well, this is a big loss. Maybe we should at least consider it. And then after the pandemic had mostly waned, we then discovered, oh God, you know, maybe the most important thing we can do, which is producing the human capital of the next generation, we've just done a terrible job. So that's one example. I'm going to give another example. The smartest companies in the world, or many of the smartest companies in the world, include OpenAI, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, etc. They've all spent hundreds of billions of dollars already on developing AI. I don't know who's going to win, but it's going to be clear in retrospect that's because they're spending it in different ways on different things, that some of them will have been discovered to have been doing the wrong thing. So we're doing the experiments, only though it's half a dozen or 7 companies doing the experiments rather than Soroush or Richard doing the experiments that are going on in this area. And some of them will lose a lot of money. The 2 leading countries in the world in terms of their innovation are the United States and China. The United States is pursuing AI as a closed system. China is pursuing AI as a much more open system. It may be that each is better for that particular country, but another possibility is that they're wrong and we're right, or we're right and they're wrong. I don't know which one it will be. The one thing I do know about making a correct decision is that for a mere, how much does this book cost?
$40 on the paperback and $110 on the hardcover.
Okay, so I want to make a recommendation. Unless you're unusually wealthy, you should buy this book and you should buy it in paperback. However, even if you're struggling as a research assistant at the Kennedy School, you should definitely buy this book. So anyhow, Soroush, I want to thank you a lot. I want to thank all of you for coming. We are going to give out books after the fact. I also know that Soroush will be hanging around and will be happy to answer any questions that you have after this presentation. But thank you so much, Soroush.
Thank you,
And
Richard.
congratulations on your book.